Unleashed. Prologue, the static before the storm. The first sign wasn't a dragon over a skyline or a portal tearing open above a football stadium. It was a house cat refusing to cross a hallway. Mittens, an orange tabby in a two-bedroom rental in Ohio, stopped at the exact same spot every time. Ears pinned, tail puffed, staring at empty air like it had seen a predator crouched in sunlight. The owner tried treats, tried toys, tried picking her up. Mittens went limp in his hands, eyes wide, and began to shake. Not with fear the way a pet shakes in a thunderstorm, but with something more stubborn. Like her body had decided there was a rule here now, and she'd rather be carried than break it. In Manila, a delivery rider's phone compass spun in place while the street around him stayed normal. He turned the bike in a full circle. The arrow did the same. He laughed, showed his buddy, and reset the phone. The compass found north again and pretended it had never lied. In a basement lab at a state university, a bored grad student stared at an ugly, noisy line on a monitor labeled field density. A project with a grant name so long, nobody used it out loud. It was supposed to be flat. It was supposed to be boring. It spiked. Not a little, like a sensor burp. A clean, vertical jump, beautiful and impossible. He blinked, leaned closer, and watched the spike settle into a plateau. A new normal. Then, as if embarrassed, the line corrected itself. It slid back down to baseline with a graceful curve that made it look like a rounding error. The student stared at it until his eyes watered. On a hunch, he opened the raw data. The spike was still there, only the display had lied. He saved the file twice, then emailed his professor with a subject line that felt ridiculous. I think something changed. In a hospital in Brisbane, a patient monitor hiccuped. The heart rate held steady. Oxygen stayed fine. But the ECG line stuttered for exactly 1 second, drawing a shape no nurse had ever seen. A tight spiral, like the machine had tried to graph something three-dimensional on a flat screen. The nurse tapped the monitor. The spiral vanished. The line returned to normal. The nurse sighed and wrote it off as cheap equipment. In the North Atlantic, a cargo ship's radar painted a flock of birds as a thunderstorm for half a minute. The captain swore, adjusted gain, and watched the storm break into hundreds of tiny blips that moved like they were being herded by something invisible. The blips stopped being birds and became wrong, a pattern, a perfect ring. Then the ring dissolved and the birds scattered. The captain didn't mention it in his log, not because he didn't believe what he saw, because he didn't want to be the guy who said birds made a circle in the sky and my radar thought they were weather. Across the world, it was like that. Little lies the universe told for a day, then took back. Minor glitches, tiny edits, reality clearing its throat. Most people never noticed. And the ones who did what people always did when something didn't fit. They blamed the nearest simple thing. Software update, solar flare, cheap hardware, stress, drugs, sleep deprivation. The world had an infinite supply of excuses. It used them like insulation. But if you stood still long enough, if you stopped scrolling, stopped talking, stopped moving, you could feel it. A pressure, not outside your skin, like humidity before a storm, inside it, as if the air had learned a new weight, and your body, your bones and blood and breath, were the first things forced to adapt. Somewhere, deep under a city that had been built and rebuilt until nobody remembered what lay beneath the foundations, a seam in the world thinned. Not because anyone prayed or spoke a spell, not because some chosen prophet read an ancient book, because the laws that held everything in place were shifting, and seams are where shifting shows first. And in that city, under fluorescent lights and stained concrete, a man named Drew Harker worked the night shift and counted quarters for rent. He didn't know anything about field density graphs or compass drift. He knew the taste of cheap coffee and the ache in his back that never fully went away. He knew how to keep a building alive with duct tape and stubbornness. And on a Tuesday night that felt like every other Tuesday night, Drew Harker was going to put his hand on a door that shouldn't exist. And the world was going to put a hand back. Chapter 1, Night Shift, Empty Fridge. Drew clocked out at 2:07 a.m. because the time clock was 5 minutes fast, and the supervisor liked it that way. Builds character, Cal always said, like character was something you could wring from people the way you wrung water from rags. Drew peeled off his work gloves and flexed his fingers. The skin at the base of his thumb was cracked from concrete dust and degreaser. He'd tried lotion once, then laughed at himself in the mirror because lotion felt like admitting he was fragile. He wasn't fragile. He just didn't heal right anymore. The warehouse lights buzzed overhead, high sodium and cheap ballast, painting everything in a tired yellow. Pallets sat stacked like silent accusations. Forklift lanes ran in clean, straight lines, a geometry meant to make humans behave like machines. Drew walked past the loading bay doors and into the break room, where a vending machine offered the same sad choices it had for the last 5 years. Stale chips, warm soda, and a sandwich that had been fresh sometime around the last ice age. He checked his phone. 2% battery. Of course, he'd started the shift at 85. Somewhere between Cal barking orders and a busted dock plate that took 2 hours to fix with a borrowed pry bar. His phone had bled power like it was offended to be alive. Drew didn't question it. He didn't have the luxury of questioning things. You saved your brain for problems you could solve. He unplugged his phone from the ancient charger cord in his locker and watched it climb to 3%, like a man watching a dying campfire catch on damp wood. He walked out into the night. The air outside had that late summer heaviness, even though summer was supposed to be over. The city smelled like asphalt, old rain, and exhaust that never fully left. The streetlights hummed. Somewhere a transformer made a low, steady whine that Drew felt in his teeth. He trudged to the bus stop with his lunch bag, an old cooler with a broken zipper, and waited under a flickering light. When the bus came, it sighed to a stop like it was tired too. Drew flashed his pass, stepped inside, and took the seat he always took. Midway back, window side, close enough to the exit that he didn't have to fight for it. His reflection in the glass looked older than 34. Not in wrinkles, in posture, a man who'd learned to shrink a little so the world hit him less. The bus rolled through sleeping neighborhoods. A few other night shifters rode in silence. A nurse in scrubs with her head against the window, a guy in a restaurant apron smelling like fryer oil, a woman in a janitor's uniform staring straight ahead like she didn't trust her eyes to land on anything. Nobody talked. Night shift people didn't waste words. Words were energy, and energy was rent. Drew's stop came and he stepped off into a street that was mostly dark. His apartment building squatted between a payday loan shop and a closed laundromat with graffiti on the windows. The hallway light in the lobby was out again. Drew climbed the stairs by phone flashlight, the beam weak and watery at 4% battery. 3rd floor, door 3B. The lock stuck if you didn't lift and twist just right. He got inside and flicked the light switch out of habit. Nothing. He sighed, felt around for the pull chain on the kitchen light, and yanked. The single bulb over the sink glowed dimly. Perfect, he muttered. His apartment smelled like dust and old cooking oil. He didn't cook much anymore. Cooking required groceries, and groceries required money that hadn't already been promised to someone else. He dropped his lunch bag on the counter and opened the fridge. The light inside worked. That at least was something. The contents didn't. Half a bottle of ketchup, a gallon of milk that had maybe 2 paws left, 2 eggs, a container of leftovers he no longer trusted, and a 6-pack of cheap beer, his one indulgence, because numbness was sometimes worth $12. Drew stared at the fridge like it might apologize. In his head, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Cal's chuckled. Look at you, Harker. Living the dream. Real king of the castle. Drew shut the fridge harder than necessary. Shut up, he whispered, not to Cal, not to anyone in the room, just to the version of himself that refused to be kind. He went to the table by the window and emptied his pockets. Coins, receipts, a crumpled note from his landlord reminding him rent was due. Again, he counted. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. Not enough, not even close. His bank app loaded slowly, then showed the number he already knew, $47.23. Rent was $800. His paycheck hit Friday. The late fee hit Monday. He leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. There was a stain up there shaped like a handprint. He'd asked the landlord about it once. The landlord had shrugged and said, "Old leak. Don't worry about it." Drew worried about it anyway. Worry was free. He rubbed a hand over his face. He'd been a decent worker once. Not the best, but solid. Reliable. The kind of guy who showed up, did the job, didn't complain too much. Then he'd thrown his back out, carrying a water heater down a staircase because the other guy on the job had been on his phone and Drew had tried to muscle it alone because pride was a stupid drug. Then he'd missed work, then he'd missed bills. Then his wife, now ex-wife, had gotten tired of living like everything was always one bad day away from collapse. Now he was the guy who fixed other people's broken stuff, while his own life stayed held together with duct tape and denial. Drew stood and went to the sink. The faucet dripped. He turned it tighter. It dripped anyway. He stared at the drip, watching the water bead and fall in a steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. He thought about calling maintenance. Then remembered he was maintenance. He laughed once, quietly. In his head, the foreman voice again. Good job, Harker. You can't even fix your own sink. He shut off the kitchen light, stepped into his bedroom, and collapsed onto the mattress without taking his boots off. The sheets were cleanish. The pillows smelled like cheap detergent. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, right before sleep took him, he felt it. That pressure again. Not in the room, not in the air, in his chest. Like something unseen had moved 1 millimeter closer to him. Drew frowned in his half-sleep and rolled over. It faded. He slept. Chapter 2. The Foreman in His Head. Drew woke at noon because the upstairs neighbor's kid had discovered the joy of sprinting down a hallway. The thump, thump, thump overhead wasn't just noise. It was a reminder. Other people lived above him. Other people had energy to waste. Drew lay there for a minute, staring at the wall, trying to negotiate with his body like it was a stubborn engine in winter. Come on, start. His back ached. His shoulders felt like they'd been filled with sand. His mouth tasted like pennies. He sat up slowly, wincing. Coffee, shower, work again. He swung his legs off the bed, stood, and immediately felt the wrongness in the air again. It wasn't strong. It wasn't dramatic. Just a heaviness, a thickness, like the world had gained a tiny bit of friction. Drew stood there, barefoot, on a cold floor, and waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. He shook his head. Sleep deprivation, bad diet, stress, excuses, insulation. He shuffled to the kitchen, filled the coffee maker with water, dumped cheap grounds into the filter, and hit the switch. The machine made a noise like it was dying. The light flickered. Then it brewed. Drew poured a mug and drank too fast. It burned his tongue. He didn't care. Pain was honest. He checked his phone. 11% battery. It had charged overnight. Barely. He opened his messages. There was one from his ex-wife. Megan, you paid half. The rest? Drew stared at the text until his eyes blurred. Child support. The part of his life that didn't get to be late. He typed with stiff fingers. Drew, Friday, I'm sorry. He didn't send another explanation. Explanations were coins you tossed into a well that never filled. He showered. The water pressure was weak. The faucet coughed and spat like it didn't believe in itself. He dressed in the same work pants he'd worn last night and a fresh t-shirt that wasn't fresh anymore. He grabbed his tool bag, a battered canvas bag with his life in it. Screwdrivers, channel locks, electrical tape, a multimeter with a cracked screen, a handful of zip ties because zip ties could fix almost anything if you were willing to lie to yourself. He headed back out. The warehouse was louder during the day, more people, more machines, more noise to hide in. Drew clocked in, again 5 minutes early because the clock was wrong on purpose, and headed to the maintenance cage. Cal was already there, leaning against the workbench like he owned the air. His gut hung over his belt. His hairline was a retreating army. His eyes were sharp, though, sharp enough to find someone else to blame. Harker, Cal said, drawing Drew's name out like it tasted bad. We got a problem. Drew didn't ask what kind. There was always a problem. What is it? He said. Cal held up a clipboard. Inventory says we're short 2 dock leveler pins, missing since last night. Drew blinked. We didn't use dock leveler pins last night? Cal's eyes narrowed. Don't get cute. I'm not, Drew said, keeping his voice even. Dock 3 was jammed. I used the pry bar and the jack. No pins. Cal slapped the clipboard with the back of his hand. And yet inventory says we're short. Drew felt his jaw tighten. Then inventory's wrong. Cal stepped closer. The smell of his cologne, cheap and aggressive, hit Drew's nose. "Listen," Cal said, voice low. "You don't tell me what's wrong, I tell you what's wrong. And right now, what's wrong is, I've got corporate breathing down my neck because our numbers don't match. So either you lost them or you took them." Drew's stomach dropped. "You think I stole dock leveler pins?" he asked, unable to keep disbelief out of his tone. Cal's mouth twitched. "I think you're the only maintenance guy on nights. I think you're the one with the key to the cage. I think you're the one who's been late on rent." Drew's hands clenched. "How do you know that?" he snapped. Cal's smile widened slightly, like he'd found a nerve. "People talk. You ain't exactly a mystery, Harker." Drew felt heat rise in his chest, thick and bitter. For a second he wanted to swing. Not even at Cal's face, at the whole situation. At the idea that a man could work himself to exhaustion and still be treated like a thief. Instead, he forced his hands open. "I didn't take anything," Drew said. "Check the cameras." Cal made a show of sighing. "Cameras don't cover inside the cage." "Then check the locks, check the log." Cal leaned in, voice suddenly colder. "Maybe I will. And maybe I'll find out you left it open. Maybe I'll find out you're sloppy." Drew tasted the word, sloppy, like a label you couldn't wash off. In Drew's head, the foreman voice laughed. "Yeah, Drew, sloppy. Always sloppy. Can't do anything right. Can't even fail in a way that's interesting." Drew swallowed hard. He didn't say the next thing he wanted to say. "You don't know what it's like to live one missed paycheck away from sleeping in your truck." Because his truck didn't run anymore. Because saying it would make it real. Cal jabbed a finger toward the work orders board. "You got a call out at Eastbridge Tower," he said. "Some fancy downtown place. Their maintenance guy called in sick. Plumbing issue in the basement. Go fix it." Drew blinked. "Eastbridge? That's not our contract." Cal's smile returned. "Corporate wants us to keep good relationships, so we're doing a favor." "For free," Drew said. Cal shrugged. "Not for free, for leverage." Drew felt something inside him tighten. Leverage, relationships, corporate. All words for people with power trading favors, while guys like Drew did the lifting. "And about the pins," Cal added, turning away as if done with the conversation. "If I find out you're lying, you're done." Drew stood still for a beat, feeling the humiliation burn. Then he grabbed his tool bag and walked out. He didn't slam the door, he didn't throw anything, he didn't even swear. Because swearing didn't pay rent. Because Drew's anger had been trained into silence. On his way out, he passed a forklift driver he barely knew, a kid named Sean who always looked half asleep. Sean lifted his chin. "Cal on your ass again?" Drew forced a shrug. "Same old." Sean snorted. "Man, you gotta stop letting him talk to you like that." Drew almost laughed. Stop letting him. Like Drew had a choice. Drew walked to the company van, an old white thing with dents in the side and a dashboard light that had been on since the Bush administration. He threw his bag in the passenger seat and climbed in. The engine turned over rough, then caught. The radio came on by itself, static and a half-formed song. Drew reached to turn it off. The knob crackled under his fingers and the static surged, then cut out. For a second, the speakers went dead silent. Then, faintly, Drew heard something else. Not music, not static. A low hum, like the sound of a transformer under load, except it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the van, from the air. Drew froze, hand hovering over the knob. The hum faded. The radio resumed like nothing happened. Drew sat back, heart thumping harder than it should have. He stared at the windshield. He told himself it was nerves. He told himself it was stress. He told himself his brain was looking for reasons to feel weird because Cal had gotten under his skin. Then he put the van in drive and headed downtown. Chapter 3. The Wrong Door in the Right Building. Eastbridge Tower sat like a polished tooth in a neighborhood of old brick and fading paint. Glass, steel, clean lines, a lobby that smelled like lemon and money. Drew parked the van in the service bay and stepped out, tool bag over his shoulder. The air downtown felt different. Warmer, denser, like the heat from the street was being held between buildings instead of escaping. He walked to the service entrance and pressed the intercom button. A bored voice answered. "Yeah?" Maintenance, Drew said. Contract call-out. Plumbing issue. A pause, a buzz. The door clicked. Drew stepped into a corridor that smelled like bleach and fresh paint. The walls were too clean, the floor was too shiny. It made Drew feel dirty just standing there. He followed the signs to the building's internal maintenance desk, where a man in a crisp polo shirt sat behind a counter staring at a computer. The man didn't look up right away. Drew waited because waiting was part of the job. Finally, the man glanced up. "You from Meridian?" "Yeah," Drew lied. Because the logo on his van wasn't Meridian, but corporate had told Cal to call it Meridian for branding reasons. It was all the same lie anyway. The man slid a clipboard across the counter. "Sign in, basement level. Pump room, leak reported near riser B. Our guy usually handles it, but he's out." Drew signed his name. The man gave him a key card. "This opens service doors. Don't go anywhere else." Drew nodded. "Don't go anywhere else." Like he'd planned a sightseeing tour of fancy basements. He found the service elevator and rode down. As the elevator descended, the air changed. Cooler, heavier. The hum returned faintly, like a memory of a sound. Drew stared at the stainless steel wall panels and watched his reflection wobble in them. The elevator dinged. B2. The doors opened onto a concrete hallway lit by fluorescent tubes. The building's guts. The smell down here was damp concrete and old dust, and a faint chemical tang. Cleaners, maybe. Or something from the HVAC. Drew walked toward the pump room. The hallway forked. One sign pointed left, MECH/PUMP. The other pointed right, ELECT/IT. Drew went left. He passed pipes that ran along the ceiling like veins, each one labeled with crisp white tags. Someone here cared about order. He reached the pump room door. It was locked. He swiped the key card. The light blinked green. The lock clicked. He stepped inside. The pump room was louder than expected. Fans, water moving through pipes, the thrum of machinery. A constant bass vibration in the floor. Drew found the leak quickly, a weeping coupling on a vertical pipe, water beading and running down into a floor drain. Easy. Annoying, but easy. He shut the nearby isolation valve, wiped the pipe with a rag, and looked at the coupling. It needed tightening, maybe a new gasket. Nothing dramatic. He reached into his bag for channel locks. His phone buzzed weakly in his pocket. Drew frowned and pulled it out. No service, of course. Then the screen flickered. Not like low battery, like the pixels had decided to misbehave. For a split second, the screen showed something else. Not his home screen, a black field with a thin white line running down the center, like a door crack in darkness. Drew blinked. The phone returned to normal. He stared at it. "What the hell?" he muttered. He stuffed it back in his pocket and went back to work. He tightened the coupling, tested it. No more water. He opened the valve slowly. The pipe held. Done. Drew was halfway through packing his tools when he heard a sound that didn't belong. A soft click, like a latch engaging. He froze. The pump room had one door. He was alone. He turned slowly and looked at the door. It was closed. Had it been closed, he couldn't remember. That bothered him more than it should have. He walked to the door and tried the handle. Locked. Drew frowned. That didn't make sense. He had the key card. He'd come in. The lock should open from the inside without a card. He tried again. The handle didn't budge. A cold line ran down his spine. He swiped the keycard against the reader. The reader didn't light. It stayed dark. Drew stared at it. Then he noticed something else. The hum. It was louder now, not the mechanical hum of pumps and fans. A deeper, stranger vibration that seemed to come from the walls. Drew tried the door again. Nothing. He set his tool bag down and knelt by the door, examining the lock. It wasn't broken. It was fine. But it was acting like it had no power, like the door was just locked. He swallowed hard. Okay. Calm. There had to be another exit, a second door, a service hatch. He turned around, sweeping the room with his eyes, pumps, pipes, electrical panels, and in the far back corner, half hidden behind a cluster of conduit, there was a door he hadn't seen when he walked in. It was unmarked, no sign, no warning, No handle, just a flat steel panel with a seam around it. Drew stared at it. He would have sworn it hadn't been there. His skin prickled. He took a step toward it. The air felt different the closer he got, like moving toward a heat source, except it wasn't heat. It was pressure. Like the world around that door was slightly denser. Drew stopped 3 feet away and listened. The pumps throbbed, the fans hissed, and under it all was that deeper hum. His mouth tasted like pennies again. He glanced back at the main door. Locked. He looked back at the unmarked door. He told himself it was a storage closet. An access panel, a door he'd missed because he was tired and stressed and angry. He told himself a lot of things. Then he reached out and put his hand on the steel panel. It was cold, but not like metal cold. Like winter air cold. Like stepping outside at night and breathing in so deep it hurt. Drew jerked his hand back instinctively. His heart hammered. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered. The panel didn't move. There was no handle, but the seam around it was wrong, not crooked, deep. As if the panel wasn't set into a wall, but into something thicker than a wall. Drew leaned closer, staring at the seam. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once. In that flicker, Drew thought he saw the seam widen. Not physically, conceptually. Like his brain suddenly understood there was a gap there it had refused to notice before. The pressure in the air increased. Drew took a step back and nearly tripped over his tool bag. He caught himself on a pipe and felt the vibration in it, the living thrum of water and machine. He forced himself to breathe. "Okay, call someone." He pulled out his phone. No service, 8% battery. He tried anyway. No dial tone, no call. He tried the keycard reader again at the main door. Nothing. He looked back at the unmarked panel and felt his skin crawl. A thought surfaced, unwanted and absurd. "That's not a door, that's a mistake." Drew shook his head hard. No. No. Buildings didn't have mistakes like that. He was tired. He was hallucinating. He'd been working too much, eating too little. Maybe he was having a panic attack. The foreman voice in his head snickered. Panic attack in a pump room. Real tough guy, Drew. "Shut up," Drew hissed. He stepped toward the panel again, slower this time. He didn't touch it. He just stood in front of it and looked. The seam was definitely deeper now. A thin darkness clung to it, not a shadow cast by light, but a darkness that seemed to exist on its own. The hum grew louder. Drew realized with a jolt that the hum wasn't just in the air. It was in him, in his bones, in the fillings in his teeth. His eyes watered. He couldn't explain it, but the feeling had a shape. A pull, not like gravity pulling you down, like a slope pulling you sideways, like the world wanted to fold. Drew backed away again, heart racing. Then the pump room lights flickered, twice, then went out. Darkness dropped like a curtain. Drew swore and fumbled for his phone flashlight. It came on weakly, a narrow beam that made the dark feel thicker. The pumps kept running, the fans kept hissing, but without the fluorescent buzz, the deeper hum was clearer. Drew's phone light swept the room. The main door, still there. The unmarked panel, still there. Except now, in the dark, it looked less like a steel panel and more like a cut in the world. The seam wasn't a seam, it was a slit. Drew took a step backward. His heel hit something that wasn't there before. He spun, phone beam snapping across the floor, and saw a second corridor opening where a blank concrete wall should have been. A hallway leading away into darkness. Drew stared, lungs tight. That hallway hadn't existed. He would have seen it. The pump room wasn't that big. And yet there it was, yawning open, lit only by the weak spill of his phone beam. The air in the hallway looked wrong. Dust motes hanging too still, like time moved differently in there. Drew's breath came fast. He didn't want to go into a random hallway that appeared out of nowhere. He also didn't want to stay in a pump room with a door that had turned into a wound. He turned back toward the main door and tried it again. Locked. Dead reader. He swallowed. No choices, just options that sucked. Drew took his tool bag and stepped toward the newly appeared hallway, because at least it looked like somewhere you could walk. As he crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped. The hum intensified. His phone flashlight flickered. And the world shifted. Not like an earthquake, like someone rotated the room around him by 1 degree. Drew stumbled, catching himself on the wall. Concrete under his palm felt too smooth. He raised the phone beam and stared down the hallway. It was longer than it should be. Much longer. The pump room behind him should have been right there. Drew turned, and the pump room was gone. In its place was more hallway. Same concrete, same flickering fluorescent tubes overhead, except these flickered with a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. Drew's stomach dropped. "No," he whispered. He spun in place, phone beam snapping back and forth. Hallway, hallway, hallway. No pump room, no door, no way back. Drew started walking, faster, because staying still felt like surrender. The hallway went on, and on. Service doors appeared along it, all unmarked. Some had keycard readers that were dark. Some had handles that didn't turn. Some looked like they had been welded shut and then painted over, as if someone had tried to pretend they weren't doors at all. Drew's phone flashlight dimmed, battery draining. He tried to keep track of turns, left, right, left, but the hallway didn't behave like a normal layout. It curved when it should have ended. It doubled back without intersecting itself. It felt like walking through a maze designed by someone who'd never used legs. Drew's breathing turned ragged. Panic rose in his throat like bile. He stopped and leaned against the wall, trying to slow his breath. The hum in the air pressed against him. The pressure in his chest returned, stronger now. Not a symptom, a presence. Drew closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, there was a door in front of him that hadn't been there before. This one had a sign, Exit. Drew's heart surged with relief so intense it almost made him laugh. He lunged forward, grabbed the handle and yanked. The door didn't move. He yanked again. Nothing. He looked at the hinges. They were on the wrong side. The door opened the wrong way. It wasn't an exit. It was a joke. Drew slammed his fist into the door, pain blooming in his knuckles. "Come on," he shouted, voice echoing down the hallway. The hum answered, not with words, with pressure, with the sense that the hallway had noticed him. Drew took a step back, chest heaving. A thought hit him, sharp and horrifying. This place isn't trying to trap me. It's just here, and I'm in it, like a fly in a wall. His phone light flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed him. Drew stood in the dark and listened to his own breathing, too loud, too human. The hum was everywhere. The pressure in his chest became unbearable. Panic finally broke loose. Drew spun, hands out, feeling for walls, doors, anything. His fingers hit cold concrete. His palms slid. Sweat. He laughed once, high and ugly, because he was going to die in a hallway that shouldn't exist, and nobody would even find his body. And in his head, the foreman voice whispered, almost gentle, "Look at you, Drew. Finally found a place you belong. Lost and useless." Drew snarled into the dark. "No," he whispered. Not to Cal, not to the hallway, not to God, to himself. No. Chapter 4, Will Makes a Handle. Panic didn't make Drew strong, it made him stupid. For about 30 seconds, he did the stupid things. He ran until his lungs burned. He slapped walls like they might reveal a hidden switch. He shouted until his throat hurt, and he tried to brute force reality the way you brute forced a stuck bolt. None of it worked. The hallway stayed hallway. The doors stayed dead. The darkness stayed thick. And the hum stayed inside him, pressing and pressing like a finger on a bruise. Then Drew tripped over something. He went down hard, knee slamming into concrete. Pain flared, hot and immediate. He lay there panting, cheek against cold floor, and tasted dust. For a second he wanted to cry. Not because of the pain, because crying would mean admitting he was out of options. He pushed up onto his elbows and groped around in the dark. His hand found his tool bag. Good, still had that. He fumbled it open, fingers shaking, and found his headlamp, an old one he used for crawl spaces. He hadn't even thought about it earlier because he'd been relying on his phone like an idiot. He flicked it on. A cone of light snapped to life. Relief hit him so hard he almost laughed again. The hallway reappeared. Concrete, dust, flickering tubes overhead that were now glowing faintly, as if the place didn't like being fully seen. Drew got to his feet slowly, knee aching. He checked his phone by habit. Dead. He stared at the black screen. Then, very carefully, he put it away, like it might bite. He steadied his breathing. He forced his mind to do what it did on the job when everything was going wrong, Stop flailing, start diagnosing. Okay, what do you know? You are not in a normal hallway, doors don't work, lights are unreliable, the air feels wrong. Something is humming and it isn't mechanical. That last one was the hardest, because it wasn't a problem he'd ever solved with a wrench. Drew closed his eyes and tried to focus on the feeling in his chest. The pressure. It wasn't pain, it wasn't exactly anxiety, it felt like standing too close to a subwoofer. Like your organs vibrated in sympathy with something bigger. He opened his eyes and swept his headlamp beam down the hallway. No exits, no signs, nothing but repeating doors and concrete. Drew's heart tried to ramp up again. He clamped down on it. Think, he whispered. He was a maintenance guy, a blue-collar screw-up. A man who couldn't keep a marriage together or a bank account above $50. But he could fix things. He'd fixed broken compressors with no parts. He'd kept warehouses running with duct tape and prayers. He'd climbed into crawl spaces no sane person would enter because someone else's comfort depended on it. He could do hard things. This was just a different kind of hard. Drew walked to the nearest door and put his hand on it. Cold, solid, real. He tried the handle, locked. He pressed his ear to it. Silence. He stepped back and looked at the door. No label, no sign, just industrial paint and a seam. His headlamp beam traced the seam, and Drew felt his stomach tighten. That seam had the same wrong depth as the panel in the pump room. Not just a crack, a gap. As if something behind the door wasn't a room, as if it was elsewhere. Drew swallowed hard. He reached out again, not to the handle, but to the seam. The moment his fingertip touched the edge, the hum intensified. His skin prickled. The air seemed to push back against his finger like he was pressing into thick gel. Drew jerked his hand back, breathing hard. In his head, the foreman voice snickered. Go on, touch it again. Maybe the spooky hallway will give you a participation trophy. Drew clenched his jaw. He looked at his hand, at the calluses, the cracked skin. Hands were for tools. Tools worked because you applied force in the right direction. Maybe this pressure was the same, not something you could fix, something you could use. Drew stared at the door seam, mind racing. Will, that word drifted up from somewhere he didn't have language for, like a memory of a concept he'd never learned. Not want. Want was soft. Will was a lever. Drew stepped closer. He put his palm flat against the door. Not the handle, the metal. He felt the cold through his skin. He closed his eyes. He imagined the building above him, Eastbridge Tower, glass and steel, clean lobby, lemon smell. He imagined the elevator, the service corridor, the van outside. He imagined his apartment, his empty fridge, his landlord's note. He imagined Megan's text. Friday. I'm sorry. Drew felt something inside him tighten. Not panic, anger, not at Cal, not at the hallway. At the idea that he'd die here, and that would be the last thing he ever did. Fail quietly. No, he whispered again. And this time the word wasn't just denial, it was a direction. He pushed, not with his muscles, with that tightness in his chest, with the part of him that had learned to swallow humiliation and keep showing up anyway. He focused on the feeling of pressure in the air and tried to grab it, to grip it the way you gripped a stubborn bolt with channel locks. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the hum surged. The air in front of his palm thickened, pushing back. Drew's breath caught. He pushed harder. His vision blurred at the edges like he was about to faint. Sweat broke out on his forehead. His knee throbbed. He kept pushing. The air gave, not like a door swinging open, like a knot loosening. Drew's palm sank a millimeter into something that wasn't metal. He opened his eyes. The door in front of him was wrong. Not gone, but altered. The seam around it had deepened into a thin black line, like a cut in fabric. Drew stared, heart hammering. What? He whispered. The black line widened slightly. The hum shifted in pitch. Drew felt it in his teeth. He understood suddenly, with a clarity that made his stomach drop. This place responded to him, not to words, not to keys, to intent, to will. Drew's breath came fast. He stepped back, then forward again, hand hovering. He didn't know what he was doing. But he could feel the handle now, the part of reality that could be grabbed and pulled. He reached out and pressed his fingers into the air just beside the door seam. It felt like pushing into thick water. He curled his fingers and pulled. The black line widened, the door's outline sharpened. Not the old industrial door, a new one. A rectangle of darkness forming inside the frame, like the world was cutting itself clean. Drew's throat went dry. He pulled again. The rectangle deepened, becoming a doorway, an opening that didn't show another hallway, another room, another familiar space. It showed nothing, a void, not scary in the horror movie way, scary in the way a cliff edge is scary when you can't see the bottom. Drew stared at it, trembling. The air around the doorway felt colder now, like winter breath. The hum became a steady vibration, almost satisfied. Drew swallowed. He looked behind him. The hallway stretched away into darkness, repeating doors like teeth. No phone, no signal. No way out, he understood. He looked back at the void door he had made. His hand shook as he reached toward it. In his mind, the foreman voice whispered, quieter now, uncertain. Yeah, sure. Step into the black hole, Drew. That'll fix your rent situation. Drew almost laughed. Then he did the only thing he'd ever done when a job was dangerous but necessary. He committed. He put his hand on the edge of the doorway. The surface wasn't solid. It was resistance, pressure, like the skin of a bubble. He pushed. The bubble yielded. Cold crawled up his arm, not temperature cold, but sensation cold, like his nerves were being rewritten. Drew gasped, yanked back, heart racing. The doorway stayed open, steady, waiting. He stared at it. This wasn't a normal decision. But then neither was dying in an endless hallway. Drew took a deep breath and tried to focus again on will, on that lever inside him. He imagined the simplest thing in the world, a door with a handle. A real handle. Something you could grip. Something familiar. As the image formed in his mind, the void doorway changed. The edge of the rectangle gained a frame, faint, grey, like unfinished drywall. A metal push bar appeared at waist height, the kind you saw on emergency exits in warehouses. Drew blinked, stunned. You're kidding, he whispered. But it was there, a handle. A concession to his brain's need to make the impossible usable. Drew's chest tightened with something that wasn't fear. It was possibility. He reached out and wrapped his hand around the push bar. It felt solid, cold, real. His fingers tightened. He pushed. The doorway swung inward without resistance, like it had always been meant to open that way. Beyond it, Drew's headlamp beam spilled into a space that wasn't the hallway. A room, or the beginning of one. Grey, empty, unfinished, like a concrete shell waiting for walls that would never be built. The air beyond smelled like nothing. Not dust, not bleach, not machine oil, nothing at all. Drew stared into it, heart pounding, and felt the pressure in his chest ease for the first time since the pump room. Not gone, but calmer, like the world had finally stopped squeezing. He swallowed, one step, just one. Drew stepped forward, crossing the threshold. The cold sensation washed over him again, but less violently this time, like the first shock had been his body learning a new rule. Behind him, the hallway hum deepened. As Drew fully entered the grey space, the doorway began to narrow. Not closing like a door, collapsing like a cut ceiling. Drew spun, grabbed the frame and shoved against it with panic-flash strength. The frame held, barely. He could feel it slipping like wet soap. No, he hissed, and this time the word was will again. The doorway steadied. The black rectangle stopped shrinking. It held. Drew stood there in the grey, unfinished room, breathing hard, both hands gripping the metal pushbar like it was the last solid thing in the universe. The air was silent here. No pumps, no fans, no fluorescent buzz, just his breath. And inside his chest, under his ribs, that pressure, mana, though he didn't know the word yet, settled into a tense, watchful coil. Drew looked down at his hands, at the calluses, at the trembling. He looked back at the doorway, still open to the endless hallway. Then he looked out into the grey, empty space and felt a thought form, slow and inevitable. If I can make a door, what else can I make? He didn't have an answer. He only had a handle, and a will that had finally found something it could move. Chapter 5. Pocket Domain, Online. Drew stepped through the door like a man stepping off a ladder that might not be there. 1 second he was in the sealed service corridor, concrete sweating cold, fluorescent lights buzzing wrong, that folded feeling in the air like the building had tried to swallow itself. And the next, he was somewhere that didn't have up the same way. He didn't fall, he didn't float. He arrived. A flat, unfinished surface met his boots with the dull certainty of poured concrete. The air was dry and tasted faintly like ozone and dust. No mold, no chemical cleaner, no basement funk, no building. He swung his head around, expecting walls. There were walls. Sort of. A box of space with corners you could see until you looked at them for more than a heartbeat. The room was maybe 20 feet across, maybe 30. The farther he stared, the less his eyes trusted the measurement. The edges weren't fog exactly. They were unfinished, like someone had cut reality and never bothered to sand it smooth. Above him was not a ceiling. It was a flat grey that didn't glow like a light and didn't darken like a sky. It was just there, like primer coat, like someone had painted over the concept of weather. Behind him, the door still existed. It stood upright in empty air, the same battered metal service door from the corridor, complete with the authorized personnel only sign, and the dent near the handle where some long-gone worker had kicked it in frustration. Except the doorframe wasn't attached to anything. It was simply pinned into space like a bookmark. Drew's throat tightened. "Okay," he whispered, because if he didn't make a sound, his brain was going to start screaming. "Okay, I'm fine. This is—" The door clicked, not closing, just acknowledging him, the way something mechanical does when it realizes it has a job again. And then the air in front of Drew shimmered as if heat were rising off an invisible grinder. Lines of faint light stitched themselves together, pale green at first, then brightening, forming a rectangle that hung in the air like a bad AR filter. Text scrolled. It didn't look like an app. It looked like a worksite display you'd see bolted to a wall. Blunt font, high contrast, no nonsense. Pocket domain initialization. Anchor accepted. User Drew. Primary affinity dimensional. Status online. Drew stared until his eyes hurt. "I'm losing it," he said out loud. A second panel snapped in beneath the first. Warning, user heart rate, high. User IQ, debatable. Suggestion, breathe. His mouth fell open. Did I just get roasted by a floating spreadsheet? A voice answered him, not from the air, not from the ceiling, from inside his skull, like his own thoughts had decided to stand up, put on a hard hat, and start yelling. "You didn't get roasted, you got instructed. Try reading." Drew flinched so hard his shoulders hit his ears. Who do you think? Your guardian angel?" The voice sounded like a foreman who'd smoked too long and slept too little. Tired, sharp, familiar in the worst way. "No, it's you. Congratulations. You finally found something you can't blame on the union." Drew's palms went slick. "I'm not in a union. And that's why you're broke." He sucked in a breath, tasted ozone again, and felt the floor under him, real, solid. Not a dream. He took a cautious step toward the nearest wall. The edge of the domain didn't meet his boot like a physical barrier. It met him like pressure, like pushing his hand into a strong fan's airflow. Not painful, just firm, resistant. He pressed harder. The resistance pressed back. His ears popped. The green panel flickered and updated. Domain edge contact. Will output. Uncontrolled. Note, stop pushing like an idiot. Drew yanked his hand back instinctively. "I wasn't." "Yes, you were. You're doing that thing where you throw your whole body at a problem and call it effort." The voice, his foreman apparently, sounded disgustingly amused. "This isn't drywall. You don't get points for overcompensating." Drew swallowed hard, eyes darting to the floating door, the only obvious way out. "What is this place?" he asked. The UI blinked, as if it had been waiting to be asked properly. Pocket domain. Type, personal dimensional instance. Size, minimal. Stability, low. Notes, you're a terrible architect. Drew stared at stability, low, and felt his stomach sink. Low like, what? Like it's gonna collapse. Low like don't do anything stupid, the foreman said, tone dripping. So naturally, you're going to do something stupid. Can I leave? Drew asked, because if he couldn't leave, he needed to start hyperventilating on purpose and get it over with. The door waited, silent, like any door that didn't care about your existential crisis. Drew stepped toward it, wrapped his hand around the cold metal handle, and pulled. The door swung open with the exact squeal he expected. On the other side was the service corridor, the same fluorescent buzz, the same cold concrete, the same wrong angle in the air like a hallway that had forgotten how long it was supposed to be. Drew leaned forward, stuck his head through. The corridor smelled like damp and old insulation. His lungs grabbed it like a familiar vice. He withdrew, letting the door hang open, and stared back into the pocket domain. 2 worlds in the same hinge. Okay, he said again, a little steadier. Okay, so I'm not trapped. Yet, the foreman said helpfully. You're welcome. Drew stepped back into the corridor. Nothing exploded. Nothing rewrote physics. The fluorescent lights continued their miserable buzz. He turned around. The door was still there, installed in nothing but air and his own refusal to accept reality. He let go of the handle. The door stayed. Then, slowly, it swung closed on its own, settling into the latch with a firm click. The hallway felt colder immediately, or maybe Drew did. He stared at the closed door. Am I carrying it? He asked. You're anchored to it, the foreman said, like a bad smell. Can I make it go away? Yes, probably. If you stop panicking and actually apply. The door vanished, not dramatically, not with a flash. It simply wasn't there anymore. The air where it had been folded in on itself like someone had pinched a sheet. Drew's breath locked in his throat. He stepped forward and waved his hand through empty space. Nothing, just cold hallway air. He swallowed, then forced his mind into a shape he could hold, like focusing on a bolt you needed to thread without cross-threading. He wanted the door. Not wanted like wishing, wanted like reaching for a tool on a belt. The air pinched again. The door appeared. Drew stumbled back with a yelp. The foreman laughed in his head. Oh look, he can learn. Put it on your resume. Drew stared at the door until his eyes watered. He could summon it. Dismiss it. That meant he could go home. He could leave this corridor, go back to his trash apartment, and pretend he hadn't touched a thin place in the world and found a private room behind it. But the word on the UI, stability low, hooked in his gut. If this thing was unstable and it was his, and he didn't understand it, it could become a problem that followed him home, or it could become the first thing in his life that didn't collapse under his feet. He hated how badly he wanted the second one. Drew looked down at his hands, scarred knuckles, grease stains that never quite came out. The permanent half-crack in his thumbnail from slamming it in a truck door months ago. Blue collar, replaceable, rent late, 1 bad week from sleeping in his pickup that barely started in winter, and now he had a door. A stupid, impossible door that listened when he meant it. Drew exhaled through his nose, then opened the door again and stepped back into the pocket domain. The air dried his sweat. The concrete underfoot was steady. The door closed behind him with that firm latch click. The UI flickered as if pleased he'd chosen the dangerous option. User returned. Note, great, more liability. Drew's jaw tightened. You're a real piece of... Language doesn't power this, the foreman cut in. Will does. And yours is currently held together with duct tape and spite, so keep it focused. Drew blinked. The foreman was right, and that made him angrier. He walked the edge of the domain again, but slower this time. He didn't shove. He tested. A palm pressed to the pressure. A breath in. A breath out. He pictured a tape measure snapping out and catching. He pictured his will as the tape. He pictured mana, whatever that was, as the spring behind it. The resistance softened. Not much, but enough that he felt it. A tiny give. The UI updated. Will output stabilizing. Comment. Wow, he's thinking. Drew almost smiled. Almost. Then something moved in the not-quite fog of the far corner. A ripple, a shift, like oil under water. Drew froze. Did you see that? He whispered. The foreman's voice went a little less amused. Yeah. The UI blinked. Alert, foreign presence detected. Threat level low. Advice: stop staring and find a weapon. Drew's throat went tight. He didn't have a weapon. He had a phone with a cracked screen, a ring of keys, and a folding utility knife he used mostly to open boxes and occasionally to cut zip ties when his boss wasn't looking. He patted his pockets anyway. Knife, keys, phone, wallet that didn't deserve the name. His fingers tightened around the knife. In the corner, the ripple shifted again, closer. Drew backed toward the door without taking his eyes off the darkness. He didn't run, not because he was brave, because some part of him refused to be chased in his own damn space. The foreman sighed in his skull. I swear to God, if you die in here, I'm filing it as voluntary resignation. And the thing in the corner made a sound like a wet spark. Chapter 6. Stats are just numbers, until they hurt. Drew didn't sleep, not really. He went home in the early hours with his work boots, leaving damp tracks across the linoleum of his apartment. He locked his door twice like that mattered. He sat on his couch that smelled like old cigarettes from the previous tenant, and he stared at his own hands like they were going to start glowing. Nothing happened. Outside, the city stayed the same. Distant sirens, a neighbor's TV leaking muffled laughter through a wall, the hum of a fridge that was older than some marriages. He drank tap water and tasted chlorine. He tried to convince himself it had been a stress hallucination, a micro-sleep dream, a panic artifact born from too many nights of overtime and not enough food. Then he focused, wanted, and the air beside his coffee table pinched. A door appeared. It wasn't attached to anything. It shouldn't have existed. But it did. Drew stared at it for a full minute, heart thudding, before he forced his body to move. He opened it. Grey concrete, dry ozone air, the unfinished sky. The pocket domain waited like a spare room you didn't remember renting. He stepped through and closed the door behind him. His apartment's sounds vanished. The city vanished. It was quiet here, in a way that made his ears ring. The UI flickered into existence before he even finished turning around. Welcome back, liability. Domain stability. Low the foreign presence, present. Suggestion, stop pretending this is optional. Drew's jaw clenched. I didn't pretend. You're pretending right now, the foreman said. You're doing that thing where you wait for life to hit you and then act surprised. We're going to fix that, or die trying. Either way, it's a change. The corner ripple was still there. Drew didn't approach it. Not yet. He backed toward the center of the domain and crouched, picking up a fist-sized chunk of broken concrete that hadn't been there before. He frowned. Was this here last time? It's your pocket, the foreman said. It's made of your expectations. You're a maintenance guy. You expect broken concrete. Congratulations. You manifested mediocrity. Drew stared at the chunk, then threw it hard at the ripple in the corner. The concrete chunk hit the edge of the darkness and vanished. No impact, no bounce. It just ceased. Drew's stomach lurched. The UI blinked. Object lost. 1. Comment, nice throw, real productive. Drew swallowed. So the corner is a void. It's not a corner, the foreman corrected. It's the domain boundary failing to define itself, which happens when you don't feed the system. Drew frowned. Feed it what? A pause. The UI changed, as if it had been waiting for this moment, like a supervisor handing you paperwork you didn't want. Calibration required. Establish baseline parameters. Unlock, stats, skill slots, mana readout, cost, pain. Confirm, YN. Drew stared at cost, pain, and felt his scalp tighten. You're kidding. I never kid, the foreman said. You do. You kid yourself. Hit yes, princess. Drew's mouth twisted. He hated the voice because it sounded like his old foreman, but worse, it sounded like himself after a bad day. The version of himself that had learned cruelty was motivation. He looked at the ripple again. It shifted closer, like something sniffing for warmth. Drew's options were simple: stay blind and hope, or suffer and know. He pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth and whispered, yes. The UI brightened. Calibration initiated. Pain didn't arrive like a stab. It arrived like a slow wrench turning inside his bones. Drew doubled over, hands on knees, breath punching out of him. It felt like every joint in his body had been loosened and then tightened again. Knees, hips, shoulders, fingers, like an invisible mechanic was re-talking him to spec. His vision washed out grey-white. He heard his own heartbeat in his ears. He almost screamed, but the sound stuck behind clenched teeth. "There you go," the foreman said cheerfully. "You wanted a new life. Step 1. Disassembly." The pain peaked at his spine, like someone had driven a nail between vertebrae, and then, abruptly, it eased. Drew sagged onto the concrete floor, panting. The UI settled into a cleaner, steadier display. User Drew. Level 1, HP 100, 100, Stamina 100, 100, Mana 10, 10, Attributes Stra 5, End 5, AGI 5, Will 7, Per 5, Domain, Rank, E-Domain. Mana 020 size, 8 meters by 8 meters by 3 meters. Stability low. Drew stared, breath still ragged. Why is Will higher? "Because you've been stubborn your whole miserable life," the foreman said. "You haven't won, but you haven't quit either. That's will. It's not bravery. It's refusing to die out of spite." Drew swallowed and sat up slowly. A tiny part of him, buried under fear and debt and exhaustion, lit up. Numbers, a baseline, a way to improve that wasn't just work harder until your back gives out. He forced himself to stand. The ripple in the corner shifted again, closer, curious. Drew looked down at his hands. If he had mana, could he do magic? How? He hadn't spoken a word to make the door. He'd just meant it. Mana and will. So he tried something stupid and simple. He held out his palm and wanted heat, not like a spell, like remembering what it felt like to hold a coffee cup fresh from the microwave. Nothing happened. The foreman snorted. "Oh my God, did you just try to conjure a space heater? You're not a wizard, you're a dimensional specialist. Keep up." Drew's face flushed. "Fine, so what can I do?" The UI blinked. Core function, pocket domain. Secondary function, inventory/storage. Note, stop hoarding trash aisle, you have no room. Drew blinked. Inventory? Try it, the foreman said. Put something away, like your pride. Drew ignored that and pulled his phone out of his pocket. He held it in front of him and wanted it to not be in his hand anymore. He pictured setting it down in a toolbox drawer. The sensation of release. The phone vanished. Drew's heart jumped. He patted his pockets in panic. The UI pinged. Item stored, phone cracked. Inventory, 1/10 slots. Drew stared at the air where the phone had been. Okay, bring it back. He pictured pulling it from the same drawer. The phone popped back into his hand with a soft thump. Drew laughed, short and breathless. Then he winced because even laughing here felt too loud, too sharp, like the room wanted silence. He tested again, keys, knife, wallet. Each object disappeared and returned. He felt a faint tug in his gut each time, like drawing from a battery. Mana. The UI updated with each use, but the mana bar didn't drop much. Mana, 9 out of 10. Mana is spent on storage, Drew muttered. Mana is spent on everything worth doing, the foreman said. Welcome to budgeting. Drew's stomach clenched at the word, budgeting. The endless math of rent, gas, food. He shook it off and forced himself into practical testing. Time. If this was a pocket space, did time behave? He pulled his phone out again, opened the clock app, and watched the seconds tick. Normal. He opened the door back to his apartment and stepped out for a moment, phone still in hand. The TV noise from the neighbor's unit was still there. The fridge still hummed. He checked the clock. Same seconds, same rhythm. He stepped back in. Normal. Then he tried something else. He left the phone stored in inventory, walked out into his apartment, waited 10 seconds, then returned into the domain and retrieved it. The phone's clock read almost the same, but not quite. A few seconds drifted. Drew frowned and repeated, out, wait, in, retrieve, drift again, not consistent. Sometimes it was a second, sometimes 5, sometimes the phone jumped backward by a fraction like it had stuttered. Drew's stomach tightened. Time is weird. Your domain is unstable, the foreman said, as if explaining to a trainee why the scaffolding was shaking. You want overtime? You have to earn it. Drew stared at the far corner ripple again. Earn it how? The ripple answered by shifting closer. This time Drew saw shape, not a silhouette with clear edges. A knot of wrongness, like a shadow had learned weight. It moved low to the ground, skittering in tiny bursts that didn't match the friction of concrete. It made that wet spark sound again. Drew tightened his grip on the utility knife. "What is that?" he whispered. The UI updated. Entity detected. Designation: threat, low, reward, domain mana. Drew's pulse spiked. Reward. Domain mana? He asked. You don't get free lunches, the foreman said. You want stability, you want expansion, you want power. You feed the domain. By killing that thing. That thing is already in your space. It's not paying rent. Handle it. Drew's mouth went dry. He hadn't been in a real fight since high school, and even then it had been stupid. Now he was in a room outside reality with a shadow-knot creature creeping toward him, and his own subconscious was telling him to commit murder for a fuel resource. He backed slowly. The creature followed, pausing and twitching as if it could smell fear. Drew's knife hand trembled. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, come on then." He didn't speak words like a spell. He pictured the door behind him like a safety hatch, and his will tightened around the space between him and it. He meant for the door to be there if he needed it. The air behind him pinched faintly. Good. Then he squared his shoulders, took a step forward, and hoped being a stubborn bastard counted as a combat plan. Chapter 7. First kill, first payment. The creature moved first. It didn't lunge like a dog. It didn't leap like a cat. It skittered, a sudden burst of motion that made Drew's eyes struggle to keep track. It was like watching a cockroach in your kitchen when the light turns on, except this cockroach was made of shadow and static and had too many angles. It hit Drew's shin. Pain flared, sharp, burning, like a rug burn but deeper. Drew yelped and stumbled back, swinging the utility knife down on instinct. The blade passed through something that had texture for half a second. Then it met air. The creature was already off his leg, a smear of darkness, retreating a foot, 2 feet, then pausing like it was deciding whether he tasted worth the effort. Drew's shin felt wet. He looked down and saw a thin line of blood. Not much, but the sight grounded him in a way nothing else could. He bled. The creature could hurt him. This wasn't an anxiety dream. "Okay," he hissed, voice tight. The foreman's voice cut in, smug as hell. "Congratulations, you found out why we wear PPE." Drew didn't have time to answer. The creature skittered again, aiming for his ankle this time, hugging the floor like it didn't want to be seen. Drew stomped, hard. His boot hit something with resistance, like stepping on thick jelly. The creature made a wet spark shriek and flattened, but it didn't die. It slipped sideways out from under his boot, like oil, reforming as a knot again. Drew's stomach flipped. "Why won't you?" "Because you're doing it wrong," the foreman said, tone disgusted. "You don't half-finish a job and walk away. That's how you get callbacks. Commit." "Commit? Right." Drew's breath came harsh. He forced his hand steady and watched the creature's movement patterns. It favored the floor. It favored shadows. It paused after each burst like it needed to reset. Drew took one slow step, then another, herding it away from the domain edge where the darkness looked thinner. He didn't want it to slip into that boundary failure. He wanted it where he could stomp it. The creature skittered at him again. Drew waited until the last possible heartbeat, then kicked sideways, like punting a bag of trash, not like trying to stab a monster. His boot connected. The creature flew across the concrete and hit the wall pressure with a sound like wet cloth slapped against plastic. It stuck there, wriggling, as if the domain edge resisted it differently than it resisted Drew. Drew lunged. He slammed his boot down on it again and again. Once, twice, 3 times. The 4th stomp felt different. Not just resistance, a snap, like something brittle had finally given. The creature convulsed, then went still. For half a second, Drew stood over it, panting, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. Then the corpse, if you could call it that, began to dissolve. The shadow knot broke into a spray of tiny black motes that rose like ash in reverse, drifting upward. The motes spiraled toward the center of the pocket domain as if pulled by a magnet. Drew watched, hypnotized. In the center of the room, a faint point of light appeared. like a tiny welding arc. The motes fed into it, one by one, and the point brightened. The air buzzed. Drew's skin prickled. The UI exploded with notifications. Kill confirmed. Entity, Gutter Wisp. XP gained 12. Domain mana absorbed, +3. Mana absorbed, +1. Drew's knees almost buckled, but not from relief, from the sensation that followed. The absorbed mana didn't just fill a bar. It hit his body like a delayed adrenaline dump, except cleaner. Sharper. Heat surged through his muscles, not a fever, a charge. Every ache he'd been carrying from work, lower back, shoulders, that constant tightness in his hands, flared for a heartbeat, then loosened. Like someone had adjusted his posture from the inside. He sucked in air, eyes wide. "Oh, holy—" "Don't you dare get sentimental," the foreman snapped, but there was something like satisfaction under it. "You did one job right. Don't make it weird." The UI updated. Level up, level 2, stat points +2, skill points +1, domain mana 3/20. Drew stared at the numbers, breath still coming fast. He'd leveled up, like a game, like those stupid mobile RPGs he'd never had the time or money to care about, because real life didn't hand you progress bars. Except now it did, and the progress bar had come with pain and blood and a shadow creature that tried to eat his leg. Drew looked down at his shin. The cut was still there, but it didn't hurt as badly as it should have. The foreman's voice went dry. "Don't just stand there. Allocate your points, genius. You want the domain stable? Feed it. You want to stop being weak? Feed you." Drew swallowed hard. "How do I?" Stat allocation available. Select attribute to increase. Cost 1 point. A list blinked. STRENDAGIWILLPER. Drew's hands shook as he stared. His instinct was simple, strength, because his whole life had been lifting, carrying, hauling. Strength was what got you through, but another part of him, quiet, stubborn, wanted will. Because will was what made the door. Will was what kept the world from crushing him. He hesitated. The foreman snorted. "I can hear you overthinking. Pick." Drew forced a breath in. "Endurance," he said, surprising himself. I'm tired all the time." "Or," the foreman said, "he wants to feel less like a corpse." Cute. Drew tapped END. The UI confirmed. Endurance +1. End 6. The change hit instantly. Not as violent as calibration. More like a deep, quiet settling. Lungs feeling a fraction wider, heart beating a fraction steadier. Like his body had been running at 80% efficiency for years and someone had finally cleaned the filter. Drew exhaled shakily. 1 point left. He looked at will. He looked at strength. He thought of his rent notice on the counter. His foreman's voice, the way he'd let life chew him into smaller and smaller pieces because it was easier than believing he deserved better. He tapped will. Will plus Vienna's. Will Astonis. No physical rush this time. Instead, the air in the pocket domain felt more obedient. Like the space around him was listening harder. The door in his mind felt closer, more reachable. Drew swallowed. "Okay," he whispered. "Now we're cooking," the foreman said. "Not literally. Don't set anything on fire. You're not insured." Drew stared at the remaining notification. Skill point. "Skills," he murmured. The UI blinked. Skill points 1. No available skills. Note, you have to earn them, like everything else. Drew's mouth twisted. "So I can't—" "Stop trying to buy your way out," the foreman said. "You're not a rich kid. You're a laborer. You learn by doing." Drew rubbed his shin and winced. "That thing was a gutter wisp." "Yeah, looks like your domain attracted a pest." The foreman sounded almost bored. "You left your door open in a weird neighborhood. Now you got roaches. Welcome home." Drew looked back toward the domain edge. The darkness was quieter now. No ripples, but he didn't feel safe. He felt watched by the unfinished parts of the room. He opened the door back to his apartment, stepped through, and shut it behind him. The city sounds returned like a slap. He leaned against his coffee table, chest heaving, then slowly straightened. His body felt Better, not like magic healing, like a hangover that didn't exist. He walked to his kitchen counter and grabbed the first heavy thing he saw, the gallon jug of cheap water he kept, because the tap sometimes ran brown. He lifted it with one hand. Normally it would tug his shoulder, now it felt lighter than it should. Drew stared at his own arm. He wasn't Superman, but he was less tired, less heavy, less doomed. The foreman spoke in his head, voice quieter now. Don't get cocky, it's one level. You're still a guy with bills and a knife. Drew swallowed and looked at the door that wasn't there anymore. I killed something, he whispered. You did pest control, the foreman corrected, and you got paid. That's the deal. Drew sat down hard on his couch. His phone buzzed, a notification, a news alert. Power flickers reported across multiple districts, utility crews investigating. Drew stared at it. His lights didn't flicker. Not yet. But in his bones, he felt something like static, the same metallic taste he'd noticed in that thin corridor. Mana, maybe. The storm before the storm. He looked at his bleeding shin, then at his slightly steadier hands. He didn't start praying. He didn't start celebrating. He started thinking like a man with a job to do and nobody to help him. What else is in there? He whispered. The foreman replied instantly, more than you can handle if you keep acting like you're special. Drew's jaw tightened. Then I get better. That's the first smart thing you've said in years, the foreman muttered. Chapter 8, Skill Unlock, Void Sprawl. Drew went back in the same day. He waited until the afternoon, when the sun through his blinds made his apartment look less like a storage unit someone lived in by accident. He ate half a peanut butter sandwich because his hands were shaking from adrenaline and hunger, and he knew better than to go into anything on an empty tank. Then he stood in the middle of his living room, stared at the air like a lunatic, and meant the door. The door appeared. Drew stepped through. The pocket domain greeted him with dry air and quiet. The UI popped up immediately. Welcome back, liability. Domain mana 3/20. Foreign presence, present. Threat, low for now. Drew tightened his grip on the utility knife, then reached into inventory and pulled out something else. A short length of metal pipe he'd kept under his sink for one day I'll fix that purposes. Improvised baton, blue-collar magic. Cute, the foreman said. He brought a stick. Next you'll make armor out of cardboard. Drew ignored it and moved forward, slow and careful. He didn't approach the domain edge this time. He stayed central, where the space felt most stable. He listened. At first there was nothing. Then came the wet spark sound again. Faint, like someone flicking a lighter in another room. Drew's muscles tightened. 2 ripples formed in the far corner. Not 1. 2. They skittered separately, then paused. Drew's mouth went dry. The UI updated. Entities detected. 2. Gutter wisp times 2. He swallowed. Okay, he whispered. Okay, 2. Good job counting, the foreman said. Now don't die. The first wisp skittered forward, low and fast, heading for Drew's legs. Drew swung the pipe down like a hammer. It connected with a satisfying thunk, like hitting a bag of wet sand. The wisp splattered, reformed, and retreated. The second wisp came from the side. Drew kicked out, catching it mid-skitter. It hit the concrete and rolled like a shadow knot, then unfolded into its wrong-angle shape again. They weren't smart, but they weren't stupid either. They moved like pests that had learned your habits. They darted in, tagged him, retreated. Drew felt a burning scrape on his calf, then another on his ankle. The cuts weren't deep, but each one spiked panic. Not because of blood, because of what the foreman had said. Pests, and pests multiplied. Drew backed toward the door instinctively, then stopped himself. If he ran every time, he'd stay weak, and weak didn't survive what was coming. He breathed in, forced his panic into a narrower shape, and tried to do what had worked in the corridor. Useful like a handle. When the first wisp lunged, Drew didn't swing. He pushed, not with his hands, with his mind. With intention, with that stubborn refusal that had carried him through years of bad luck. He wanted the wisp away. Space responded. The air in front of him tightened, then tore, not like fabric, like reality flaking under stress. A thin, jagged line of absolute black opened for half a second, An edge with no depth, like looking into the absence behind existence. The wisp hit that line, and part of it vanished, not dissolved, not burned, removed. The wisp made a sound like a wet radio shorting out, then staggered backward, its shape unstable now, missing a chunk as if someone had scooped out a piece with a spoon. Drew froze, staring at his own hands. The tear snapped shut. The black was gone, but Drew could still feel it, like the afterimage of staring at the sun. The UI exploded. Skill unlocked. Void Spall, rank E. Description, sheer target matter into null. Cost, mana plus will. Warning, do not spall self. The foreman's voice sounded almost impressed. Well, look at that. Drew's heart slammed. Did I? You cut reality, the foreman said, tone flat. Try not to cut your own face off. The second wisp lunged. Drew didn't have time to process. He raised his hand, pictured a cut line, and meant for the wisp to lose its head. A black tear opened, slightly wider this time, cleaner. It kissed the wisp's shape. The wisp's front half vanished into nothing. The rest of it flopped, shuddered, then dissolved into motes. The first wisp, damaged, tried to retreat. Drew swung the pipe, pinning it against the domain edge like before. Then he used Void Spall again, carefully, like scoring a line with a utility knife. The black tear opened. A chunk of the wisp disappeared. The rest dissolved. Motes rose, spiraling toward that central point again. The UI flooded. Kill confirmed ×2. XP gained 24. Domain mana absorbed, +6. Mana absorbed, +2. Drew staggered as the mana hit, stronger this time. His muscles tightened, his vision sharpened. His body felt like someone had turned the contrast up. Not pleasant, not painful, powerful. He sucked in a breath and tasted ozone. The UI chimed. Level up. Level 3. Stat points, +2. Skill points, +1. Domain mana, 9 out of 20. Drew stared at Void Spall's listing. He'd just learned an attack skill by accident. He'd also opened a line of black nothing that made his stomach feel like it was tipping forward. He looked at the spot where the tear had opened. There was no mark, but he could still sense a thinness there, a place space remembered being cut. Where did it go, he whispered. The pieces? The void, the foreman said, hence the name. Drew swallowed. Is the void a place? Everything is a place if you can get there, the foreman said. Don't get curious. Curiosity gets people killed, and you don't have a replacement. Drew's hands shook as he allocated his stat points. This time he didn't hesitate as much. He put one into strength. He put one into endurance again. The changes hit as a deep steadiness, like his joints had been re-lubricated. He looked at domain mana, 9/20, almost halfway. The pocket domain's edges looked a fraction cleaner. The unfinished fog had pulled back a few inches, like the room was proud of itself. Drew stared. So killing things stabilizes it. Killing things feeds it, the foreman corrected. Like, look, I know you're not educated, but even you understand engines. Drew's mouth twisted. Fuel. Fuel, the foreman agreed. And you're the idiot driving. Drew opened his palm and wanted to open Void Spall again, not as an attack. Just to see. A hairline tear opened in the air, no target, just black. Instant nausea slammed into him, like vertigo. The UI flashed. Warning, void exposure, will strain. High, note, stop poking the abyss. Drew snapped it shut on reflex, gagging once. He leaned over, hands on knees, breathing hard. The foreman sighed. There's your answer. You can open it. You can't handle it. Yet. Drew wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. So, skill point? He looked at the skill point +1. Void Spall was unlocked, but maybe it could be ranked up, or he could unlock something else. The UI offered options now. Skill point available. Options: 1. Void Spall, rank up, improve control, reduce cost 2. Pocket Step, new, short-range spatial shift within Domain 3. Domain Reinforce, new, increase stability temporarily. Drew stared. Pocket Step sounded like teleport. Domain Reinforce sounded like don't die. He didn't feel brave enough to pick teleport. He ranked up Void Spall. If monsters were coming, he needed a blade. Void Spall, rank D. Control improved. Cost reduced. The foreman made a pleased noise. There, now your murder scissors won't take your lunch money every time you use them. Drew exhaled shakily, then looked around the now empty domain. He didn't feel safe. But for the first time, he felt like he could fight back. And that meant something. Outside, in the real world, his phone buzzed again. He stepped out, retrieved it, and saw another alert. Unexplained aurora-like phenomenon reported over multiple states. Drew stared at the words. He looked up at his apartment ceiling like he could see the sky through it. Mana was coming. Whatever had made his thin corridor thin wasn't staying local. He had a head start, and head starts were only useful if you ran. Chapter 9. Blueprint Thinking. Drew didn't know how to be a wizard, but he knew how to learn a job. You watched, you copied, you made mistakes, you got yelled at. You fixed the mistakes, you did it again until it was muscle memory. And the pocket domain, for all its impossible physics, responded to repetition like any worksite. So Drew treated it like one. He brought a tape measure. He brought chalk. He brought a carpenter's pencil. He brought a small folding workbench he'd found on the curb months ago and never thrown out because it might be useful. He stepped into the pocket domain, set the workbench down, and looked around. The foreman UI flickered with immediate disdain. He brought a bench. Comment, adorable, does it come with a safety briefing? Drew ignored it and started measuring. 8 meters by 8 meters by 3 meters. Small, but consistent enough to map. He snapped chalk lines along the floor, dividing the domain into squares like a grid. 1 meter squares, like tile layout, like concrete cuts. He needed references because Void Spall felt like trying to swing a blade while blindfolded. When he used it in panic, it worked. When he tried to use it deliberately, it made him nauseous and shaky. So he made it physical. He placed scrap objects in the squares, a brick, a busted chair leg, a soda can. Targets. Then he stood in the center of the domain, steadied his breathing, and raised his hand. He didn't say words. He pictured the act of scoring drywall with a utility knife. Pressure, angle, clean line. Will as the pressure. Mana as the blade that made pressure matter. He meant a cut. A thin black tear opened in front of him, smaller than before, cleaner, controlled. It hovered for half a second and snapped shut. Drew swayed, stomach flipping. The foreman's voice cut in. What did we learn? Drew swallowed hard. That it still makes me sick. No, the foreman snapped. We learned you're trying to make a 10-inch cut with the wrist strength of a toddler. Scale it down. Drew breathed in, tasted ozone, and tried again, this time picturing a tiny cut. Like trimming a zip tie, like shaving a corner. The tear opened smaller. His nausea was less. The soda can target, 3 meters away, suddenly lost its top third. It didn't crumple. It didn't fall over. The top third simply wasn't there anymore, as if reality had been edited. The remaining can hissed, then leaked soda onto the concrete floor. Drew stared, stunned. The UI chimed. Void Spall success. Mana, 11/13. Note, clean up your mess. Drew's mouth twitched. I did it. You did a controlled cut, the foreman corrected. You didn't do it well, but yes. You finally used your brain. Drew exhaled, then looked at the soda spreading across the floor. He willed it into inventory. The puddle didn't move. The foreman snorted. Inventory is for objects, not your mistakes. Drew grunted and used a rag. He spent the next hour, maybe more, maybe less, because time in the domain still drifted, testing. Small spalls, medium spalls, spalls at different distances. He learned quickly, if he tried to spall too large, nausea spiked and the tear wobbled. If he focused on a line rather than a hole, the cut was cleaner. If he imagined void too hard, he started feeling like he was leaning toward an edge. So he didn't imagine void. He imagined the job. Cut line, control, pressure. He was good at jobs. He wasn't good at believing he deserved the result. The foreman made sure to keep that knife in. Every time Drew succeeded, the voice found a way to jab. Don't celebrate. You're still slow. That was luck. Your form is trash. At first it pissed Drew off. Then slowly he recognized it. It was the voice he'd used on himself every time something went wrong. When his truck broke down, when his hours got cut, when his girlfriend left, when the rent notice showed up again. He'd thought he was being realistic. He'd been bleeding himself out one insult at a time. The fact that his pocket domain had chosen that voice as its system interface felt like a sick joke. Or a diagnosis. Drew wiped sweat from his forehead and stared at the chalk grid. "Why are you like this?" he asked quietly. The foreman paused. For the first time since this started, the voice didn't fire back instantly. Then it said, softer but still sharp, "Because that's the voice you listen to." Drew swallowed. He set the rag down and stood, stretching his shoulders. His body felt different than it had a day ago. Not just less tired, more capable. Like his muscles obeyed him more cleanly. He pulled up his stats. Level 3 STR 6 END, 7 AGI 5 WILL 8 PER 5 MAN A 1313 DOMAINMAN A 920. He stared at endurance 7. No wonder breathing felt easier. No wonder his back didn't scream the way it used to. He looked at domain mana. If he filled it, what happened? Did the room expand? Did stability improve? Did time drift settle? He didn't know yet, but he knew how to find out. Kill more pests. Feed the domain. Get stronger. Simple. Brutal. Fair in a way life hadn't been. Drew opened the door back to his apartment and stepped out. His living room looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because he had. He walked to his kitchen and lifted the battered cast-iron skillet off the stove with one hand. It was heavier than the water jug. It still felt heavy, but not too heavy. He could do it. He set it down slowly. His phone buzzed again. Another alert. Major network outages reported across multiple cities. Engineers cite unexplained interference. Drew stared at the words, then at his phone's signal indicator, flickering between bars like it couldn't decide what physics it believed in. He thought of the metallic taste in the air, the way his door pinched space like it was soft clay. Mana, will, not language, not code, something older than circuits, or maybe newer than reality itself. Drew went to his window and looked out at the parking lot. A stray cat sat on the hood of a car, perfectly still. Its eyes reflected the streetlight in a way that felt too bright, too aware. A man across the lot slapped the side of a vending machine, then jerked his hand back like he'd been shocked. Except the machine didn't have power. Drew's skin prickled. The world was beginning to tilt. He had a pocket dimension, a sarcastic system, and a skill that could cut chunks of matter into nothing. That wasn't a plan, it was a head start. And head starts only mattered if you used them before the race turned into a stampede. Drew turned away from the window, walked back to the center of his living room, and summoned the door. It appeared steady and obedient. He stared at it, then stepped through again. Behind him, the real world kept fraying at the edges. Inside, in his private, unfinished job site of reality, Drew tightened his grip on his pipe and whispered to the foreman, "Find me the next one." The foreman's voice answered, delighted in the way only an asshole part of you can be delighted. Finally, the new hire wants overtime.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.